Today I am going to explain such a wonderful unique horror survival movie called Until Dawn 2025. At the beginning of the story, a girl named Melanie is seen desperately trying to escape from an unknown force that is pursuing her. A few days later we meet her sister, Clover, who is on a road trip with her friends, Max, Megan, Nina, and Abel. Clover is determined to find her missing sister, and the others have joined the journey to support her. During the trip, they watch Melanie's last recorded video, which was shot in a convenience store across the street. There was very little hope left, but Melanie had refused to give up on any chance to be found. Megan, an Asian girl with a fascination for the supernatural, especially a game called Spirit Games, suggested trying to communicate with a spirit. The idea felt strange to the others, but they all agreed to participate. They held hands and formed a circle. Under Megan's guidance, each of them began to feel the presence of something gradually approaching. Just then, a passing minibus broke through the circle, disrupting the moment completely. Meanwhile, Melanie had quietly entered the convenience store. She showed the shopkeeper a photo and asked, "Have you seen this girl?" The shopkeeper shook his head and replied that he hadn't, but then quickly added that the girl had disappeared. Melanie was stunned. The shopkeeper went on to say that recently many people had come searching for missing relatives, and all of their cases appeared to be linked to a place up ahead called Glory Valley. Overwhelmed with a sense of urgency and hope, Melanie ran outside. She had finally uncovered a possible lead about her sister. The group quickly got into their vehicle and headed toward Glory Valley. But soon after, heavy rain began to pour down. The driver kept changing the route, trying to find a passable road, but he was unable to navigate through the mountainous terrain. Fear set in and tensions rose. The group began to argue. Then suddenly the road ahead cleared. While the rain continued behind them, the sky in front was completely clear, as if some invisible force had split the world in two. As they moved forward, Megan noticed several graves scattered across a nearby lawn. A strange, unsettling fear crept into her mind. The rest of the group, unwilling to stay in the rain, silently walked toward a magnificent wooden house that stood in the dry zone. Only Melanie remained still, standing at the threshold. The rain behind her seemed strange, unnatural, almost like it was hiding something. He extended his hand and felt the water. It seemed normal, but a doubt lingered in her mind. Suddenly, the shadow of a human figure appeared through the fog ahead. Melanie was stunned, but without thinking, she ran into the rain. Seeing this, her boyfriend Jack shouted her name and rushed after her. Meanwhile, the three friends who had entered the house also sensed that something was wrong. In the middle of the hall stood a large sand clock. Nina glanced at the visitor's registration book on a desk. As she flipped through its pages, she noticed Melanie's sister's name written multiple times. Megan quietly made her way to the bathroom. The mirror was covered in thick dust, and there wasn't a drop of water in the tap, as if no one had lived there for many years. The cameraman, ever passionate about recording everything, wanted to capture every moment. But as soon as he entered a bedroom, he was startled to see that all the photographs hanging on the wall were of missing people, and among them was a photo of Melanie's sister. Meanwhile, Melanie, drenched in the rain, continued searching for her sister. Just then, a huge hand appeared out of nowhere. It was Jack, who had caught up and pulled her back. After returning home, everyone shared the strange experiences they had encountered. Melanie quietly mentioned that she had heard her sister murmuring something in the rain. At the same time, Nina noticed that the sand clock had mysteriously started running on its own, even though no one had touched it. Suddenly, the loud roar of an engine came from outside. Rushing out, they saw their car had moved into a rain zone. The person sitting inside remained completely still and silent. Terrified, they all returned to the house. No one knew what kind of mad person they might run into in this desolate place. With no mobile signal available, Melanie and a few others decided to search for a landline phone. Using their mobile flashlights, they descended into the basement, where Jack noticed that each of the four walls had windows, an odd and unsettling detail. They were still trying to make sense of everything when Melanie's scream rang out. She had found a landline phone. But despite repeated attempts, it wasn't working. Meanwhile, Megan came across a walkie-talkie radio. Upstairs, cameraman Abel and Nina suddenly heard the loud bang of a door slamming shut. Out of curiosity, Abel went to investigate, but he didn't return for a long time. Sensing something was wrong, Nina cautiously began walking down the corridor. That's when she saw a shadow in front of her. As soon as she turned on the lights, she was horrified. Abel had been cut in half. The three people downstairs also heard disturbing noises. By the time they rushed upstairs, they found Nina lying in a pool of blood. Jack immediately warned everyone to stay alert. But suddenly, a masked killer entered the house. The three remaining people quickly scattered and hid. As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Jack picked up a stool and hurled it with all his strength. However, the killer seemed unfazed. He turned and stabbed Jack, who collapsed to the ground. Megan, trembling with fear, was hiding inside a cupboard. Through the gap in the door, she watched the killer slowly approaching. At the same time, Melanie was hiding behind another door. Summoning all her courage, she grabbed a knife from a nearby table and lunged at the killer. But her attack had no effect. The killer didn't seem to feel pain. Realizing she was no match for him, Melanie fled the room in panic and unknowingly ran into the forest. There, in the thick mist, she saw a familiar shadow. But before she could react, the killer appeared and stabbed her in the stomach. With Melanie's death, the remaining 5 survivors were also killed. Then, something strange happened. The sand clock inside the house started moving on its own. In an instant, everyone was transported back to the exact moment they had first entered the house. But this time they remembered everything, every moment of their deaths. The most terrifying part? Their photos were now hanging on the wall alongside the others. Panic set in. Were they being trapped here by some unknown supernatural force? Abel, desperate, said that all he wanted now was to take his car and escape. But Nina disagreed. She remembered the registration book. It had several entries with the same names written again and again. This meant that all of them had gone through this horrific loop multiple times before. At that very moment, a loud banging sound echoed from outside the door once again. Everyone cautiously moved forward and saw the main door opening and closing repeatedly on its own. Abel and Jack rushed to it and, with combined force, managed to shut it tight. Meanwhile, Nina noticed the sand clock had started moving again. Megan's face turned pale with fear. She had a spiritual sensitivity, a gift that allowed her to feel more than the others. And now, she sensed something terrible was about to happen that night. No sooner had the words left her lips than her body began to convulse violently. The overhead bulb shattered with a piercing scream, and in that instant, Megan vanished completely. As the group frantically searched for her, they found her suspended in midair. Her face was disturbingly pale and unnaturally flat, and strange, garbled noises poured from her mouth, as if countless spirits were speaking through her at once. Then came another blood-curdling scream. Megan's neck twisted grotesquely to one side, and she fell to the ground, dead. Terror gripped everyone's hearts. Were they destined to die again? Suddenly, a sharp knock pounded against the door. Melanie's expression changed instantly. She recognized the voice calling for help. It was her sisters. The voice kept crying out, begging to be let in. Everyone grew suspicious, but Melanie, acting on impulse, opened the door. There was no one outside. Before anyone could react, Melanie's eyes widened, and in the next second, she was hurled into the air by an unseen force. The rest were pushed back into the room as if shoved by invisible hands. Melanie struggled to climb back, but her body began sliding backwards on its own, dragged by an unseen presence. Jack, seeing her in danger, ran toward the door to help. Abel tried to block his path, urging him to stop. "This is our only chance to escape," he shouted. But Jack refused to listen. Without hesitation, he flung the door open and ran outside. Meanwhile, Melanie regained consciousness inside a wooden hut. The walls were lined with strange, ceremonial masks. A television played a news report about a mine collapse. An old man sat silently on the sofa, appearing to be asleep. Melanie cautiously observed him, thinking she should quietly leave. But as she reached for the wooden door, it slammed shut with violent force. Panicked, she turned around only to find the old man now standing awake. In a low, eerie voice, he said, "Either endure this night, or become a part of it." Having said this, the old man suddenly shoved Melanie backward with both hands. A mask resembling an oxygen mask was forcibly placed over her face, and slowly both her eyes began to turn pitch black. At the same time, the old man started aging rapidly, his skin withering, bones cracking, until he collapsed into a heap of mud and decayed flesh. A strange, terrifying smile now spread across Melanie's face. Meanwhile, outside, Abel and Nina had jumped into the car. Abel no longer cared about anyone else. He slammed his foot on the accelerator and sped off into the rain. But just a short distance down the road, they saw a tall, ominous figure standing in front of the car. Abel froze in fear. Hands trembling, he spun the car around and drove back toward the house, back to the so-called safe zone. Nina tried to open the door to get out, but it was locked. In the next moment, a gush of blood splattered across the window. Abel had been killed in a single brutal blow. The killer had returned. Meanwhile, Jack had reached the wooden hut. but all he found inside was a pile of ashes. There was no trace of Melanie. He scanned the room carefully. In one dark corner, a clown doll sat eerily in a rocking chair. Jack stepped closer to inspect it, realizing it was just a lifeless toy. Furious, he kicked it across the room. But as he turned around, Melanie was suddenly standing there. Her face was hidden behind a mask. Before he could react, she attacked. Jack collapsed to the ground. Melanie had killed him brutally without hesitation. When she stepped outside the hut, the masked killer appeared in a speeding vehicle and ran her over, crushing her to death. Once again, the entire group had been wiped out. But this time, when they were brought back to life, something had changed. They were prepared. Acting quickly, they shut the main door tightly and hid together inside the bathroom. They remembered what the old woman had said, "Endure the night, and you may survive." While waiting in silence, Abel began to feel thirsty. He stood up to check the sink, but Megan stopped him. "You won't find water here," she warned. Still, Abel turned on the tap, and to everyone's surprise, clean water began flowing from it. Relieved, they all took turns drinking from the tap, finally feeling a brief moment of calm in the nightmare they were trapped in. Suddenly, Abel began coughing violently. Within moments, blood started pouring from his mouth. His coughing intensified, becoming uncontrollable, and then, horrifyingly, his entire body burst apart. Screams filled the air as panic erupted among the group. Nina, covered in blood, tried frantically to wipe it off, but before she could react further, she too exploded. In that instant, everyone understood. The water was poisoned. Drinking it meant certain death. Megan, who had been the third to drink, stood frozen. Her face turned pale. As all eyes turned toward her in horror, she too burst apart, just like the others. Melanie, stunned and heartbroken, realized what had happened. Once again she had failed. But perhaps there was still another chance. Jack gave up hope. He collapsed, and soon a pool of blood spread beneath him. Now only Melanie remained. Exhausted, she lay down on the floor, awaiting her fate. But just then, a man stepped out of the shadows. It was the convenience store salesman. Melanie's eyes widened in shock and recognition, and in the next moment, her body went limp. She was gone. The sand clock began to rotate again. And once more, they were all brought back to the beginning. A new cycle had begun. This time, however, everyone was terrified. They quickly started searching for clues. Melanie uncovered something chilling in a pile of old documents. The salesman's true identity. He wasn't just a shopkeeper. He had once been a psychologist. The rest of the group unearthed an even more disturbing truth. This area was once a prosperous town. But after years of reckless mining, the entire town collapsed underground, killing more than 1,000 people. The man, the so-called salesman, had been part of a relief team sent to assist the survivors. A psychologist among the rescue workers. Jack now understood why he had seen strange windows in the basement. Something had always felt off. Meanwhile, Nina opened a door that led outside, only to find a long, dark tunnel ahead. A chilling gust of wind blew through it. Overcome by fear, she slammed the door shut. On the other side of the house, Abel discovered an old videotape box. Curious, he opened it, and what he saw shocked him. It was a recording of the psychologist's secret experiment. He had locked a lone survivor in a hidden room and subjected him to repeated games of fear, isolation, and despair, all for the sake of psychological study. The prisoner in the video had gradually begun to change, both mentally and physically. By the 13th day, he had fully transformed into a demon. Everyone watched the footage in stunned silence. And then the truth hit them. This is exactly what's happening to us, Nina whispered. At that moment, Melanie discovered the key to their survival. "We can't escape," she said with resolve. "We have to eliminate that psychologist. That's the only way to break the cycle." Just then, a faint voice echoed from within the walls of the unlimited store. It sounded like someone praising Melanie. The voice calmly said, "If you want to meet the doctor, come to the forest. Alone." Without wasting a second, Melanie sprinted outside. The others tried to follow, but Abel blocked their path. "Didn't you hear it?" he snapped. Only Melanie was called. But Jack refused to listen. "If we die, we'll come back again," he said firmly. With that, he grabbed Megan's hand and ran after Melanie. Abel turned to stop them, but before he could say a word, Nina picked up an iron rod and drove it into his chest. He gasped, stunned. Jack gave a nod to Nina, and he and Megan disappeared into the night. Meanwhile, Melanie had already reached the edge of a dark, ominous forest. Without warning, she stepped into a deadly trap. A sharp noose tightened painfully around her leg. A rusted iron chain was attached to it, and in the next moment, some unseen force began dragging her into the darkness. Back at the house, Abel and Nina came face to face one last time. But before anything could happen between them, the masked killer returned, and this time he finished them both off. In the forest, Jack and Megan stumbled upon a half-submerged building, sunken deep in mud. Just as they approached it, a strange, slithering sound echoed behind them. They ducked behind a tree. Thick, sticky liquid suddenly dropped down from the branches above. A grotesque, monstrous creature emerged before them. Paralyzed with fear, Jack and Megan turned and ran. But Megan slipped, crashing onto what appeared to be a glass ceiling. It cracked slightly beneath her. One wrong move and she would fall through. Jack reached out to help, desperation in his eyes. But before he could grab her, the demon arrived. Jack could only watch in horror as Megan was dragged into the shadows. Elsewhere, Melanie, still bound in the noose, was alive barely. Her leg throbbed in pain, but her will to survive burned stronger. Through the darkness, Jack stumbled upon her. He rushed to help, trying to free her from the iron trap. But as he did, a terrifying monster slowly emerged from the trees, its eyes locked on them both. Jack quickly looped the hunting noose around Melanie's head. But then her eyes suddenly turned blood red. He froze in shock. Despite the monstrous transformation, Jack could recognize her. The clothes, the face. This demon was none other than Melanie's own younger sister. Heart pounding, they both ran and hid behind an old barricade deep in the forest. Melanie's chest heaved with panic. She had failed again. Even after everything, she had still not come face to face with the elusive psychiatrist. And now the remaining 3 friends are dead. Determined, Melanie made up her mind, she had to start over. Finding a shard of broken glass nearby, she handed it to Jack and whispered, "Finish me off." Jack hesitated, his heart heavy, but before he could act, he noticed the monster approaching from the shadows. He panicked and ran. As he sprinted, a few raindrops landed in his mouth, and within seconds his body exploded like a balloon filled with blood. Once again they all returned, reborn in the same cursed loop. But this time, something was different. There was no fear on their faces. They had grown used to dying. Then suddenly, a strange bulge began to appear on Abel's back. Everyone's expressions turned grim. Without wasting time, Melanie rushed to the visitor's register. Her eyes widened. It showed that she had survived 13 nights. The same number is mentioned in the videotape. According to the footage, this meant she only had one last chance. If she failed again, she would be trapped forever, becoming a demon herself. Everyone then realized something terrifying. "We've only died 4 times, Nina said. "That means we've lost some memories." At that moment, the cameraman Abel had an idea. He quickly pulled out his phone and started checking the recordings. What he found chilled them to the bone. The phone had captured other deaths, ones they didn't remember. In one, a parasite burrowed into their bodies. In another, a horrific death god tore through them. Each death was different, brutal, grotesque, unforgettable. But in the last video they finally saw him, the psychiatrist. He glanced around cautiously, then disappeared behind a door leading to a tunnel. Suddenly, Megan's face appeared in the footage. Abel clenched his fists. "I'm going into that tunnel," he declared. "The final answer has to be there." Just then it struck them all. Megan was missing. She was already gone. This was their last chance. There was no point in running anymore. Together they made a decision. They had to find Megan, and they had to kill the psycho doctor. They made their way through pitch-black, narrow tunnels. The air was heavy with dread. Up ahead they reached a crumbling, abandoned colony. Melanie glanced around cautiously. In the distance a monstrous figure appeared. "There," she whispered, pointing. "Stay quiet." But before they could react, another demon suddenly pounced from the side. Panic erupted. Screams echoed through the darkness. The noise attracted even more monsters, their twisted shapes rushing toward them from all sides. Everyone bolted into another tunnel, sprinting blindly. With great effort, they managed to shut a heavy metal door behind them just in time, blocking the monsters. But relief was short-lived. The masked killer crashed through a shattered window, landing inside the tunnel. Jack and the others shouted in fear. Melanie stumbled, then turned and ran toward the settlement. She tripped and fell hard, her head narrowly missing a jagged stone. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. And then, she saw her. A demon wearing her sister's face. Melanie froze. "It's me, don't you remember?" she pleaded, voice trembling. But the demon's expression didn't change. Melanie realized it was no use. With a burst of emotion, she shoved the creature hard. The demon fell, landing directly on the sharp stone, its shriek piercing the silence as it was impaled. Meanwhile, Jack and the others faced off against the masked killer. They had found an old, broken axe and a rusted shield. Using teamwork and courage, they fought back and, with one final blow, brought the monster down. Elsewhere, Melanie evaded several more demons, ducking and weaving through shadowy corridors. At last, she reached the chamber where Megan was being held. Megan was locked in an experimental containment room, a monster looming over her. It was clear now, the twisted psychiatrist wanted to amplify Megan's fear to its peak. Desperate to find a way in, Melanie entered another room and stopped cold. On the table inside the CCTV control room were her own files, surveillance images, medical charts, everything. Then the psychiatrist stepped in. He smiled, cold and calculating. "Every fear, every monster here, they're real," he said calmly. "The souls of those who died in the disaster, they are the true energy of this nightmare. I've turned tragedy into terror." He set his coffee mug on the table, oblivious to the dripping pipe overhead. Melanie's eyes flicked to the ceiling. A plan formed in her mind. She silently nudged the mug beneath the leaking water. Moments later, the doctor absent-mindedly picked it up and took a sip. He paused, his face contorted. "What is this?" Before he could finish, Melanie lunged forward and shoved him with all her strength. Suddenly, the psychiatrist's body erupted into a stream of blood and gore, exploding from the inside. Breathing heavily, Melanie bent down and retrieved the lab key from his remains. Without wasting a second, she rushed to the locked room and freed Megan, just in time. Meanwhile, Jack and the others were still darting through corridors, chased by relentless monsters, trying to survive the nightmare that never seemed to end. The good thing was that the layout of this place was incredibly complex, which helped them escape. Everyone ran with everything they had, hearts pounding, lungs burning, and finally they made it out. At that very moment, the countdown on the sand clock reached 0. Then, the first ray of sunlight touched their faces. The rain that had soaked the mountain roads began to dry, and with it, the nightmare seemed to fade. It was over. At last. Exhausted but relieved, they all sat together for a moment in silence. Then, without saying a word, they climbed into the car and drove away, leaving behind the horrors of the house. Or so they thought. Unseen by them, as the car disappeared down the winding road, their shadows reappeared on the monitor screen inside the house. And this is where the movie ends. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel.